Good evening. I would like to call this Concord Township Zoning Commission meeting of Tuesday, October 3rd to order. We have a relatively light agenda this evening. A lot of work to do, but light agenda, not a lot of items on the agenda. We have a work session. The first item is a work session for the amendments for the discussion with the Zoning Commission. Basically what we're doing is we're reviewing some of the amendments that have been proposed during the last several months of work that we had done coming up to the changes in the Discovery Lane, the overlay district, and even though that has been tabled for now or been rescinded at this point by the trustees, we think there were a lot of good pieces of legislation that were built in, a lot of work that was done, and we felt that it would be a waste to just let all that go. So we decided to forge ahead and get some of this work done anyway. Whether this ever comes back or not, it doesn't matter. There's still some good information that was put together in this work, and we'd like to look at incorporating some of that into the zoning text moving forward. So, Heather, would you like to come up and tell us what you've done? I know you've kind of condensed everything down and put everything together for us.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. Okay, as Mr. Lingenfelter indicated, we wanted to move forward with some of the other amendments that weren't related to the ISPD and the Capital District that were some of the previous changes. So in your packets, put together kind of an outline of discussion of the various sections that we were proposing to modify. We can just kind of briefly go through these. The first section was section 5, which is the definition section. There are a couple minor modifications to some existing definitions, such as church and a commercial motor vehicle. And then the bulk of the modifications were new definitions that we were proposing in relationship to the parking section, defining some terms such as driveway, loading spaces, the actual parking aisle in the parking area, just to tighten up the regulations as it related to parking in the commercial districts and also in the residential districts. There was a minor change to the definition of school, which would include the continuing education facilities and high-tech vocational post-secondary education facilities as well. And then inclusion of new definitions for streets, both public and private. Under the existing definition of street type, we are including in the definition of an alley. And defining what the waiting space or waiting lane would be. Those are for like when you have the drive-through facilities. Those are the areas where the cars wait to do their transaction. While going through this, though, I did notice one other definition that I was going to suggest that we need to revise. It was one that was adopted for the term microbrewery, and that was effective in February of 2015. And the definition had referred to the maximum brewing capacity not to exceed 15,000 gallons per year. However, that should have been barrels per year. And they're looking at the microbreweries, maybe measuring barrels, and we did a little bit more research on that. And rather than gallons, it should have been, the term should have been barrels. So we'd like to include that as one other change. And sorry it wasn't in your, what I had already mailed out to you, but it was something I had seen after.
Is that what the state requires?
It's not a state requirement, but I think it's the general, industry. When you're defining microbrewery, it's an establishment that brews less than the 15,000
A term that's standard. A term that's standard.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Well, 15,000. Not that I know much about this.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
15,000 barrels is substantially more than 15,000 gallons.
Yeah.
Because there's 15 gallons in a half barrel, which is typically the standard of most measurement in the brewery industry. 15 and a half gallons in a half barrel. This is just casual knowledge. Really don't, this is just
No experience.
something I read the other day on Google. But, so when you think about that, I mean, that makes a substantial difference between, so depending on what the township was looking at from a, you know, from a control standpoint on the microbrewery's capacity, you know, 15,000 barrels is 15 times 15 the amount, so it would be 15 times 15,000. So you're talking, I don't have that math in my head, but it's a pretty big number. So the gallons would go up substantially.
When you said you based it on so you said they measure capacity in that industry by barrels. Where does 15,000 barrels fall? Is that considered relatively small? Is it?
I think 15,000, the microbrewery is the upper end.
That's big.
Actually, I was Sydney and I were recently down in Athens for the state planning conference, and we had the opportunity to visit some of the microbreweries that were down there. And we were at some locations that brewed as little as 500 barrels a year, up to their most popular one was they brewed 12,000 barrels a year, and at that point they're like selling them and marketing and packaging them.
Is that Jackie O's?
Yeah, that's Jackie O's. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a big, they're a big operation.
Yeah.
And they have a pretty big distribution network, and they're doing 12,000 barrels.
But I don't believe they were
Right?
doing.
So 15,000 barrels that's a lot. I mean, that's, I don't know, I'm not sure what Great Lakes Brewery does, but I'm sure 15,000 barrels is or what, like Fatheads out in North Olmsted.
Okay.
What they would do, those would be some good breweries to check with what their capacities are.
Okay.
You know, because those are pretty big. 15,000 barrels is a pretty big operation,
Yeah,
in my opinion. I mean,
From a fit in the community standpoint, perhaps
right.
Fatheads would be a good one to compare to because it's on more of a main drag, but it has a restaurant. It has, when we had that conversation a while
Right.
back, that's probably a lot closer to what we're looking at, whereas Great Lakes Brew is that's in the more urban environment, and their brewing operations in an old warehouse that has been a part of that neighborhood for a while. So their capacity, I mean, I don't know, it'd be interesting to know just from a trivial standpoint, but I think that has to be a lot closer to what the kind of operation we'd want to see in the township, or at least we wouldn't want it
Or
bigger
Willoughby,
than that.
or Willoughby
Willoughby
Brewing.
Brewing
Yeah,
Company.
so
Yeah, Willoughby
what's-
Brewing, and I'll guarantee Willoughby Brewing isn't doing anywhere near 15,000 barrels. I'll guarantee that. They don't have
Okay.
that big of an operation.
No, yeah, I mean, that's
You
a
know,
good,
I mean,
comparison.
Those three vats that are in there that you can see when you go in, that's pretty much their brewing operation.
I mean, Great Lakes
So.
I mean, you can leave the state and find that beer.
Right.
So that's going to be a substantial operation.
Well, and Jackie O's is the same way. Jackie O's is a very popular microbrewery down in Athens, and, you know, if they do 12,000 barrels, that's
What was
It's
their
a pretty
facility
big
like?
operation.
How big would you say it was?
pretty
Um,
big.
How big was their facility? Jackie O's, you said you were there.
Well, we were in the tap side,
Right.
Uh-huh.
the brewery side.
Okay.
So I didn't.
Pretty big operation.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Did you?
Where is-
They actually brewed it there.
No, it's not. Fatheads is kind of unique because Fatheads has a really big restaurant
It's huge.
in front of their, operation. Now, and Fatheads has they have a production facility that's a few miles away.
Oh, okay, so not.
So they don't not everything they do is on site there. There's another production facility that's a few miles. And again, this is just all casual knowledge on my part. I don't have
Well,
intimate.
I guess the question to be asked is where is that, with that microbrew, where is that referenced in the rest of the code as being available? Because if we're talking about a microbrew being allowed in the area we were fighting
Right,
over,
right, right.
then that's one thing, but if we're talking about allowing it in the grist mill,
Right.
that's a completely different situation.
Well, I think
So
the
that would be kind of where I would look at it, question, where are we referencing that as a available?
it came up when we were talking
Permitted
more
use,
about, the capital district type stuff. It didn't,
Well, it would be a conditional use anyway, wouldn't
right.
it? Or would it be that would be a permitted use?
And I think that's an interesting, actually, thought process. I mean, we don't, oddly enough, I mean, right now, you could probably put a conditional, I mean, over in that area now, you could probably classify that into that zoning over there easily. Like, if you're just gonna put up commercial structure
Right.
and be a micro brew, that would fit over there with the current zoning. You wouldn't even.
Yeah, if you had a Willoughby, depending upon what you're looking at, if you had
Yeah.
a Willoughby Brewing who's looking for an actual,
Correct. The conversation we
factory,
had
for
was
lack of a
the-
better term, or brewery that's not to be
Right.
associated with a restaurant, then that's one thing versus,
I think the conversation we had was a combo tasting room, but then we
Right.
recognized that a lot of those operations would then in turn have somewhat of a production basis to them as well, like where they may be. We're definitely kind of on the fringe of really understanding that market and how to zone that. I know we had a lot of questions last time we talked about it.
Right.
Like, how do we define, and we didn't really research a lot of things then too.
Well, to Jerry's point, the microbrewery is a conditional use currently in the Capital District only. So the Capital District, just because I know you're relatively new on the board, I'll show you on the map, is the area in the red
In the-
district
okay.
here. Yeah.
So it's only in
from
that-
Auburn, over to 44 to New Ryle. And it is conditional use, and it does have to be in connection with some restaurant or
Right.
tavern or bar.
so I think we're probably looking at something more along the lines of 15,000 gallons versus 15,000 barrels.
Yeah,
Well,
it's got-
Yeah,
just in,
I mean, just-
in common, just based on the 15,000 gallon per year, that's basically roughly 1,000 barrels.
Right.
A little bit
Okay.
less than 1,000 barrels. So
So
I think
maybe-
it should be more than that. I
Yeah,
think
that's a
1,000
little
barrels is
small.
probably on the small side.
Yeah.
But I'd be interested to know, I guess I would want to know, and I'm sure it's public information, it shouldn't be too hard to find
Okay.
out what, like Fatheads, what their what they brew capacity-wise, what Willoughby Brewing does. Those would be a good model.
Okay.
Maybe Market Garden Brewery in downtown Cleveland, it would be a good example, a good model to look at. What's the one down in Akron? Thirsty Dog. Then you look at Voodoo is in Erie. That's another, it's a good microbrewery to look at. Voodoo would be a good one in Erie, Pennsylvania, not too far away. Those would be, I think, some good
Okay,
microbreweries to look
Yeah.
at to give
Yeah.
us a better understanding. But I think,
okay.
sometimes bigger is better, but to me, 15,000 barrels is a pretty big operation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can
So
look
you may
into
want-
that.
There might be a happy medium somewhere between that and,
Okay.
15,000 gallons.
I think what that is probably leaning toward, like Morgan said, is more with the restaurant, where they're
Yeah.
brewing it to sell it in their restaurant,
Right.
not brewing it to distribute it through Giant Eagle or,
Right.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't be, I mean, the ultimate goal for any microbrewery is distribution. I mean, that's because that's where the money is.
but no,
So-
I mean more of just,
Right.
in general, what we're looking at, if we're talking about just the Capital District and not into the
Right.
the industrial, I can't think what that zoning,
Like
I-
the
I know.
RD2 or the
Yeah.
BX, some of
yeah,
the,
into those districts where you're talking about a bigger distribution, you don't want to, we don't necessarily want a distribution center
Right.
being
I
run
think
out
I
of
think
the
what
Capital
we're, I
District.
think what we're trying to get is a tasting room / restaurant with some on-site brew capacity. Whether that would be a branch location of somebody that's in existence now. If they ever grew, they'd obviously be in a situation like many of them are that have
Right.
satellite production facilities of substance in commercial districts that aren't in that kind of a space. If they,
Right.
to Andy's point,
Okay.
if they're successful, they're going to end up with that problem. They're going to have to put up a facility somewhere else.
Right.
On that topic, the micro distillery is still in 8,000 gallons, is that correct? That's not barrels?
Right.
yeah.
They'd use barrels too, wouldn't they?
Well,
No,
it's a little bit of a different.
Okay.
Technically, yes, they do, but I would think that, to me, that's a good, I don't have a problem with the micro distillery number.
Yeah.
That seems 8,000 gallon micro distillery, that's probably, if you wanted to look at something in micro distilleries, you could look at that, what is it, Red Eagle? That's out there by,
Oh, in the Langton. Yeah, what I used to hear.
Is it Red Eagle? Is that
Red-
it? Red Eagle?
It's over. It's across from
It's by the,
M Cellars and
Yeah.
South River
yeah,
Winery.
South River, right.
Yeah.
It's over there. I would consider that a micro distillery. That's a pretty small operation. And maybe Seven Brothers, I think they're a small micro distillery operation that do local. And then I think, what's the other one? OH? Is it OH? There's another one that does, local
There's one on Bainbridge, I can't think of it.
whiskeys and whatnot. So I would try those and
Okay.
see, if, just to get again, I think there's enough of them around to get a good number.
Okay,
Because we certainly, I think that would be I think either one of those would be great additions, to the, and have we looked at any like winery type of a thing too? Is that, like not the winery where they grow the grapes, obviously, but the ones where they bring in the juices and they make the wines. Didn't we have, wasn't
I thought
somebody
we talked
looking
about that at one point.
yeah,
I
there
thought there
was,
was
there was
I thought-
someone that was interested in doing what they
Right.
were referring to as a,
there's a
urban
name for that.
winery.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't grow the grapes they don't grow the grapes, they just basically buy the
Buy the
juice.
juice.
And then they
Yeah.
make it and barrel it and then serve it on premise.
right,
So that would be, something that would be of interest, I'm not sure what the name of what they call those wineries. It's not really a true winery per se.
Micro winery?
yeah, micro winery, yeah.
I don't know.
That's
Could
something
be.
that we didn't really look into too much, but we can see what's out there and, but I will definitely follow up on these other microbreweries, see what their capacity is and come back with some comparison. And then along with that, we'll look into, the zoning that went along with that and how they were approved and, if they had parameters, at the
Right.
local level and see what they were, just to kind of compare, maybe what are some of our conditional use requirements versus if they had any or,
When we say micro, we probably have to put an amount, like barrels, like you're saying.
yeah.
That would be the capacity we would allow to go into that area, which would cater to basically the people who are coming there to eat dinner. They can see, I know I've been in a couple places in Dayton where they have the restaurant, but yet you can see into see the big stainless steel facilities while they're making a little bit
Yeah.
there for on-site use. And they allow you, maybe to buy a six-pack and take home with you if you want. That's what we're looking at, not a big, humongous, big Baps place or something like that.
We don't want Anheuser-Busch.
Anheuser-Busch.
Well, that's a whole different ballgame. Whole different
I mean, hey, Amazon distribution centers have been talked about. Why not?
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
big.
Yeah.
Go big or go home.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so we'll hold off on that for now. We'll do a little bit more looking
Alright.
into that. All right. I'm just kind of going through in order of what I had sent you in the packets. The next section.
Before we jump
Oh.
off of there, I did have a
Yes.
couple of questions about some of the
Sure.
definitions. I don't know if we want to wait until,
No, we can do it now.
The end or do
Yeah,
it
no, let's
now?
do it as we're going through, yeah.
number 59 and 60 on 5.6, on page 5.6. Just kind of I guess this is more just a term of art more. Under 59, you got driveway, and then in driveway, it references at the end that the driveway may serve multiple uses if approved. But then the very next definition is shared driveway. Is it redundant to reference in the driveway that multiple uses can occur on on a driveway if you're then defining shared driveway right after that?
Well, I think the difference is that the driveway provides access to one parcel, one lot of record, and then the shared driveway.
Right, no, I
Provides it to choose.
understand it, I guess I'm
Yeah.
just questioning, and maybe it's just being a pain in the rear end
Oh, no, it's okay.
on language, but, where it says, "And unless approval has been granted for a shared driveway, in which case the driveway may serve multiple uses." And then the very next definition is driveway shared.
Right.
So is there really a need to have that language in there? Just something to look
Yeah.
at and think through,
Okay.
to
Yeah,
not
we can look
cause
at
any
that.
confusion in the future if there's,
No, that's a good point.
and then, I guess going further into the definitions where you're referencing for parcel on 143 on page 5.16. It's referencing that the parcel is recorded and is distinguished in Lake County Auditor's property, as well as in a lot. Is kind of a similar definition. I don't think that's in any of the papers here that should go into the code. As I run into, are we going to run into any issues with those definitions when we're talking about subdivision plats where if we have language in there regarding reviews of lots when they're not actually recorded yet, if it's still in the, before the parcel, the plat's been recorded? Just trying to, I mean, more,
No.
that's maybe a question more to run by legal counsel
Okay.
on that, just as I look at it, and if we're defining something as parcel or lot, and then we're using that same term later in the code where it's not been recorded, but our definition of parcel or lot is recorded, are we running afoul of somebody coming in at a later date and arguing, well, you can't do that because it's not a recorded lot, or just the way the definition is written, that it's being written that it is recorded already. So if you're talking about a subdivision, and in your plan review, you're referencing lot,
Yeah.
but lots defined as something that's already recorded, but at the point where you're reviewing those
it.
plans, they're
It's
not
kind of a
recorded lots
proposed
yet.
lot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, well,
I don't know, I mean, that's just
No.
something maybe just to bring up to legal counsel to ask that question, just to clarify. I'd rather not have the argument later down the road with the developer.
yeah, because I mean, the existing
Yeah.
definition of lot has always indicated that it's a land legally recorded in the recorder's office, but yeah. We can have them look at that again and make
Yeah.
sure that that's not an issue.
And then again, number 212, waiting space or lane on page 5.23. Define, you're putting the term cars in there, designated for cars to wait in. I don't know if there's a better term to put in there, if it's. 'cause
Vehicles,
you-
maybe?
Yeah, well, you're later defining vehicles,
Yeah.
and vehicles talk about, much bigger trucks and such that aren't necessarily gonna be in. But I think we may be okay. I'm sorry, page 5.23.
5.23.
212. You may be okay because later in the code, you do define the size of a waiting space.
Right.
But again, just to make sure, maybe, a legal counsel
What are you
question
thinking
on.
it should
I don't
be?
know. I
Oh.
have no idea whether
Okay.
it's vehicles or whether this is the place to actually put the size in, rather than referencing,
Oh, okay.
putting the size at a later date where it's being referenced as a waiting space. Maybe this could just be defined as, a lane or area that's, that's sized at this for, waiting while utilizing a drive-up or drive-through. I don't know. I'm not,
Okay.
I didn't, other than putting my legal hat on to go through this and think, how could this come back to bite us later on? But
Right.
again, just maybe that's the location and definition, is to define the size of the waiting space rather than just having a general definition and going back to.
Right, although, with like other similar definitions like parking space, we don't dictate the dimensions of it within the definition. Um,
And cars may be a perfectly
Yeah.
good term, I just, are they gonna be in violation of the code if a,
Motorcycle.
motorcycle or a box truck goes through there?
Okay, well, maybe,
You know,
yeah, I
it's
mean,
just-
maybe
I don't wanna
instead
get-
of cars, it's vehicles or
Yeah.
passenger vehicles or something like that, and I can review that
Right.
with legal and get an opinion on that.
Okay, that was my definition section.
Okay. Okay. The section 11, which is the zoning permit section of the zoning resolution, a lot of this was just adding some headings in and kind of rearranging some of the existing regulations as far as how we process zoning permit applications, when they're required. Some of the changes that we are including in, we would like for applicants to obtain a zoning permit when they're building a retaining wall that also requires a building permit from Lake County, and that's typically goes into effect when the retaining wall is higher than 4 feet in height. And then also, it was just clarifying that when you're doing an attached porch onto a house, and that a zoning permit would be required as well. It doesn't really fall under the definition of deck, but a lot of times the front of the house, you're adding on a porch, whether it be enclosed or open, that you just want to make it clear that that does require a zoning permit, zoning approval, because you are required to meet that 50, depending on what district you're in. If you're in the R1, you have to meet the 50-foot setback from the right-of-way. So we want to be able to review that zoning permit just to make sure that they are complying with that.
Do you require a zoning permit for a deck if you're just refurbishing it? You're not changing the footprint, but say you're...
If you're going to replace the footers and everything, yeah. If
The
you're-
footers, yes, but I mean, if, like, say the deck itself is deteriorated and you're just replacing the top of it
If you're
with
just
new
replacing,
material.
repairing it, then no.
Yeah, no,
No.
okay.
If you're reconstructing it,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I meant.
oh,
As long as the footers are there, the basic structure to support it is good.
Mm-hmm.
And you just want to change the top of the deck because it's deteriorated, so you put new boards on or new material. Like
no,
now.
as long as we already had a permit for that original one and
Right.
it's lawful and conforming, then you're
Right.
able to make the repairs
Okay.
without, yeah. Yeah. If you're going to change something, make it higher or do,
Yeah, that's
something like that. then-
Yeah, that's a major
Mm-hmm.
change, but a lot of times with the old decks nowadays, pressure-treated wood deteriorates over time, and then you just want to replace the upper
Mm-hmm.
part with new, especially now they got the new materials, the new composite materials that
yeah.
last forever.
Right.
I would think as long as you're just doing that, you shouldn't have to have a permit to do that.
The only caution with that is if you start pulling it up and then you look at the footers and you're like, oh man, we gotta rip the
And
whole
they have
thing
to,
out,
yeah,
then you would be, required to get another zoning permit and then a permit from Lake County Building Department, because they're gonna be the one that inspects the footers and making sure you're gonna be
Gotcha.
42 inches down beyond.
Okay.
All of that good stuff as
All
far
right.
as the building code.
Right.
Putting Andy to sleep here.
Below the frost line and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. And then, like in 1102, just making it clear for when site plan review is required, just referencing that section a little bit more up front for, folks that are coming from the commercial side of the spectrum. So when they flip to the zoning permit, they know right off the bat that, hey, I have to go through this site plan review process before I can get a zoning permit. And then this just kind of outlined the zoning permit review procedure, just in a little bit, an easier, simplified way for folks to read. It's the same process that we're already following. Same expiration process. You have a year to start the project, and then 2.5 years to complete. And then just on the last page of that, just adding in there that a zoning permit is not required for any agricultural buildings which are exempt from the regulations. So, did you have any questions or comments on anything in that? Anybody?
The one question I had was with regards to the expirations. And
Uh-huh.
do we have anywhere, and I didn't get a chance to go back through the code, but anywhere for the ability to renew a zoning permit?
The only
If
way to
it's-
renew it, you just reapply.
Let's go back through the
Yeah,
whole
it
application
expires, yeah.
process.
There's no renewal. Okay, and then in section 13, which is the conditional use permit section, there's some housekeeping items here. A while back, we had done the consolidation of the residential districts, if you recall, and we eliminated the R5, which was like the senior kind of continuing of care, kind of like district. And with that, there were a few references in section 1306 that were overlooked that referenced the R5. So on page 13.4, in letter F there, we're just deleting the reference to the R5, and then also in section H there, the reference to R5. And then some other housekeeping items as it related, since we were looking at the parking section, that, you know, staff was looking at parking in all other sections of the zoning resolution, and we needed to just do some housekeeping as well here on page 13.8, the parking for this conditional use, just making it clear that it meets the standards in section 29, which is the parking section. And then it was kind of redundant just to list the parking spaces shall be provided in the parking areas, because we just put that right up at the top saying all the parking must meet section 29 unless specifically modified, you know, below, which we left intact. And then on the next page in 1308, went ahead and made the change to reference the off-street parking section 29. And added in the statement that for the child or adult care daycare centers, that the vehicles that they use to transport their clients, that they're allowed to park those overnight at the center as long as they're meeting the other parking setback requirements. Because they may have a bus or a van that they need to park there. And then under section 1311, under college university, referencing the off-street parking as provided in section 29. And then we already have, we've eliminated the additional language that talks about the parking areas screened from abutting properties, because we do already talk about screening in section 38 for any non-residential use, which would include a school. So there's already standards in 38 that talk about screening from adjacent properties, from the parking areas. So it was a little redundant to have it in both sections. The language is stronger in section 38. And we did that modification on a few of these other sections as well, like under the library, museum, community center, for the community parks and playgrounds. These were very similar modifications. Under the adult group homes in section 1316. Some changes there for the off-street parking referencing section 29. The elimination of G4, which on page 1315, that statement cannot be in there. You can't discriminate those folks that might fall under that category. And then under the drive-through facilities in section 1317, here we're now referencing the new waiting space requirements that we outlined in section 2909. That's where we provide the table of the number of waiting spaces and the size of them that are required based on the use. Just switching the terminology to reference the waiting spaces, which is a new term that we're proposing to define rather than the stacking area that was undefined. Similar edits under the gas station, 1325, referencing section 29 for off-street parking, the waiting spaces in accordance with 2909, and that a loading space should be provided on the site plan as well. Tends to be a lot of deliveries and such at gas stations, that they should have an adequate area to do that. And then under the car wash, making the modifications to reference section 29 for off-street parking, and then also the waiting space requirements that are found in 29. Same thing for the automotive services, that's in section 1328. And then I know we talked about the outside dining, and we went back and forth about parking and do we require more, and the consensus was that we just put it on the applicant to provide evidence this would be under the Board of Zoning Appeals, that they have adequate parking for the outside dining area that would be approved. And then in 1335, which is the section that addresses the microbrewery, microdistillery, maybe we'll want to make some more changes here if we find out some more information. But I was just clarifying under A, we do have a provision in there that the microbrewery or distillery has to include that restaurant component. And it has to be located in the same building. And I just want to make sure that the restaurant has to constitute no less than 20% of the total floor area of the business. Any questions or about anything in there or discussion?
Is that 20%, is that an arbitrary number?
That was one
Or
that.
is that something that you,
That I didn't come up with that. If you recall, the township had hired Mark Majeski to help write some of that legislation. I kind of came in on the end of that. I'm not sure where he got that 20% figure. I don't know if that's based on looking at some existing distilleries or looking at existing zoning, but that's something else that, while we're looking at some of the other ones you mentioned, if we can get a handle on, the restaurant usage versus the brewery area.
that's the minimum.
The restaurant has to.
Has to be a
Yeah,
minimum.
a
Has to be
minimum,
at
yeah.
least 20%.
Yeah,
Could be more,
right.
but it's gotta be at least
Mhm.
20%. Probably.
It's to make sure that they're requiring that, or having the opportunity, to do the tasting of the beer, but we already do require that.
Well, what would happen, let's just, just out of curiosity, if a microbrewery came in and say they wanted to be a really small microbrewery, somebody in this small capacity size, maybe 5,000, or a few thousand barrels, not really big, and they didn't really need a big footprint, but they still wanted to have a tasting room or whatever with it, and let's say they wanted to do, maybe 20% would be a substantial portion of their production facility, and they wanted to downsize that to say 10%. What would happen? Would that be a variance that would be required then?
That
Would
be
they still have an opportunity to make that proposal, or would they have to adhere to that 20%?
They would first have to seek a variance,
Okay.
and if the variance was approved, then they could get an application in for the conditional use
Okay.
for the brewery.
Right.
And folks would probably do that at the same meeting, put an application in for the variance and for the CUP.
Right, so they would have to get the variance first before they could get the conditional use then?
Mhm.
Okay. All right.
Good there? Okay. All right, and then under the residential districts, section 15, the table of uses, 15.021. One change here, under accessory uses, we were referencing recreational vehicles. We're now going to change that terminology to reference the off-street parking, because off-street parking is an acceptable accessory use in the residential district, and it also addresses the parking of the recreational vehicles. So this is now going to point folks to section 29, where the regulations are actually contained. And then there was a modification that needed to be required in table 15.03-1, which is on page 15.5. When we consolidated the residential districts and created this table, for the lots that we had indicated lots greater than 2 acres were permitted up to the 1,532 square feet. And lots under 2 acres were up to 1,024, but it should have been lots 2 acres or greater could do the 15,032 square feet. So if you had exactly 2 acres, we weren't accounting for you, and that was just an oversight. It should have been the 2 acres and greater, get the 15,032 square feet.
Mhm.
That's just to get that back where we had it originally. something that we didn't talk about before, and I wanted to bring up with you. Under the R3 development standards, that's some of those developments that we've had include like the Aria's Way and the Gabriel's Edge developments. They're the private street developments, the condominium type ownership. The ones we've had over the last few years, they've done the detached family cluster dwellings. So Ryan Homes recently did the one that Rick Summers developed off of Johnny Cake. Driving through there, and we were very light on the regulations as it related to setbacks within that district. We have setbacks that are in place as far as from the overall lot line, which is the boundary of the whole entire parcel. But we didn't have anything in there that had it dictated like a setback for the dwelling from the private street. And looking at some other communities and just looking, at the parking and how tight the parking is in the R3, you can't park on the street. If you're having a party, there's no parking. We don't require them currently to provide any guest parking, but then we don't dictate like a setback from the street, so they're putting the houses like 20 feet from the road, which only gives you enough parking for like 2 cars completely in your driveway. So the thought was maybe we could include in a setback for the dwellings. So what I had suggested in here would be that the dwellings need to be a minimum of 36 feet measured from the curb back from the private, 36 feet from the curb of any private street. And that, if we did that, that would allow ideally 4 cars or 2 cars tandem to be 2 cars tandem to be parked in a driveway. And I think that would provide a little bit, more usable front yard for folks too, because if your house is 21 feet back from the road, you have like a 15-foot utility easement in your front yard, and should you need a utility repair, they're basically going to tear up your entire front yard just to make that repair. I think it would make the communities a little bit nicer for what people want in Concord. And talking with some other planners in their kind of more their dense areas, they've found that anything shorter like than 30 feet really isn't adequate for off-street parking in some of these areas. So I just kind of put that in there for a discussion to see if that was something that you wanted to consider. I mean, obviously it doesn't affect what's already there, but if a developer were to propose another R3 development, that would be a new regulation that they would need to comply with. Any thoughts?
What do they do now, like in Aria's Way? If they can't park on the street and they have a short driveway, what do they do? Park on the street.
Yeah,
Probably,
yeah.
Aren't they supposed to have some parking for guest parking in these developments?
They don't
Well,
have any in
it's
there.
not required.
I know they don't have it in there, but
It's not required right now.
Condos do, but.
Condos
So like,
do,
the
yeah.
country scene, on country scene that
Right.
goes through to
Yeah.
country scene, their problem is they have hydrants on both sides of the street.
Mm.
So they can't do any on-street parking, and their driveways are super short, so,
They did a couple of extra parking pads in that development, if I recall.
for Gabriel's Way, they did provide
Yeah.
a couple
Not
additional
very
parking
many, though.
spots, maybe 4 or so. but,
Yeah.
yeah.
Driving through there and when things are under construction, like, it's a nightmare. Aria's Way isn't as bad because some of those houses are set
Bigger.
back
Yeah,
further,
some
so
of
their
them.
drives are a little bit longer. They're not as short as like the Gabriel's Edge, but right now we have, there's no standard in there, so it's hard to get the developer to do anything but what they feel is the minimum.
Yeah.
Like, they're, oh, well, you don't require any additional parking, or, there are no setbacks, so why can't we do the 20 feet back? It's,
No, I think that makes good sense.
Yeah.
Especially since they don't have room in there anyway for guest parking, only for 1 or 2 places. You have to walk 5 neighbors
Yeah.
down in order to park your car, walk all the way up. Setting it back, I would be in favor of, so that they can have 2 cars tandem at least. And plus taking care, like you say, utilities, give them more of a front yard too. It makes perfect sense in multiple reasons.
So like, for example, like, in Summerwood, the front setback minimum is 30 feet from the right of way, so that's actually like 48 feet from the pavement of the road. So just to put it in, you know, like this would be 36 feet back from the road, so the drives would not even be as, I don't know if your houses are set back right at the minimum or not, but like, and then the R1 and the R4, the minimum setback is 50 feet from the right-of-way, which would actually be like 68 feet from the pavement. So it is a much shorter setback, but it's enough that would allow, you know, 2 cars to park tandem on the driveway. People are, I think, more now, like families have the kids that are driving, they have more than 2 cars, they're not necessarily using their garages for
Yeah.
parking anymore, they're using it for storage.
Storage.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Even in our development, that's the case. 3-car garage, and it's not uncommon to see 1 or 2 cars parked in the driveway.
Driveway, yeah.
Come on. Really?
I agree. I think that's
Yeah, me too.
very prudent.
Okay, you have our vote. You got my
Yep.
vote.
Sounds good.
So it sounds good.
Okay. Andy, you got anything, or? what do you-
Oh, I've got lots of things. No, I think it's good.
Okay,
Would be good to get some citizen input.
citizen input on
We don't
that?
have any citizens here to give us input, so I guess we just have to kind of do what we think is right.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it wouldn't affect any existing developments, so if you're already living in Arya's Way or Gabriel's Edge or in Country Scene, I mean, what you have is, you know, lawful and conforming, so.
Yeah.
Do we have any? Have you run across any access problems in there, like in Gabriel's Edge, or I'm guessing that's probably worse than Arya's Way as far as potential
Access?
congestion. Well, they got fair headers on either side of the street, and the driveways are so small. I know one of the biggest issues we usually come in with these site plans is when the fire chief or fire department comes in and says, you know, we got to make room for our apparatus, which is not a small amount of room in most cases. Have we had any problems? Because I'm trying to picture Gabriel's Edge now, and yeah, you throw. I mean, where do they park? There's fire agents on both sides and small driveways.
Well, I think actually in Gabriel's Way, they may be able to do some on-street parking, but the houses are so close to each other, they're 15 feet from wall to
Right.
wall, so there's not a lot.
No.
You know, maybe 1 car for each house could park on the street technically, only on one side and not
Yeah, I've
overnight.
gone-
And then I don't know, I mean, I have to look in and find out, you know, from the,
I've gone down
Fire
that street, and
department.
It's been a
it's,
while since I've
occasionally someone has their car out there, and you have to wait. If someone's coming the other way, you wait till someone
Yeah.
comes around, because you have to skirt around them. They're not supposed to be doing that, but they do it.
Are those existing houses, are they kind of wedged in there between a front setback and a rear setback? Front yard setback and a rear yard setback?
well.
So such that they, with
No.
those specific developments, they could actually have been built 10 feet further? The developer just didn't want to pay for all that extra concrete?
Yeah. They could have been set back further, because the only setbacks that are in place are in relationship to the one lot. So a developer will get like a 20-acre lot, and in essence, there's only 4 lot lines, because each individual house is not on its own separate lot. It's limited common area, like it's set up like they only own like the house and the
These are condos,
footprint.
yeah.
It's a condo type development. They don't actually own the land around them. It's not a lot line. So there are no setbacks in place from the limited common element lines. They only have to meet like a 50-foot setback from, you know, the sidelines or the rear, and that's really for the perimeter of the development. It creates like a buffer,
Right.
in essence.
So if we required the 30-foot or 36-foot from the curb, it's probably not. Those development, I guess what I'm looking at is, could those developments have been built with the 36-foot setback without causing, you know, that, you know, the developer's not looking at it and saying, well, I have to buy another lot in order to
Uh-huh.
meet these requirements?
I mean, they would have had to develop it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
much
one
di-
for
much
sure.
differently. If you go backwards.
Well, country scene, there's not a lot of room one way or the other. I mean,
Country scene, they probably wouldn't have been able to do at all,
Yeah,
but
because they're right up against Alta Care.
Right.
Yeah.
There was that building on
It was
one
a
side.
very
and then-
shallow lot
And
to
then the
begin
lot
with.
line, yeah, I don't think you'd have room on Country Seat,
Right.
or at least that whole initial part along Elder Care, you would have just had road, and then you would have had to bend it to make that kind of setback. Would have been tough.
Because if you go into St. Gabe's parking lot in the back, you can see
Yeah.
right where their front line is. Well, first of all, they got a big tower that's there for one thing too. Plus they have a gas well thing coming in inside. But just there's a fence and practically just a small swale and bingo, there's the houses.
You have pictures?
Google Earth.
Oh, yeah.
Or Google Maps.
Yeah, but see, so the country scene is actually phase one of
it's a-
Gabriel's Edge, and
wasn't
Gabriel's
it?
Way was phase two, so I think had that regulation been in place, the developer probably would have come up with a different plan. It just
Yeah.
would have been a totally different plan.
Right.
Yeah, I was just curious whether
Yeah.
it was, something they could have done if it was just, the developer did it that way in order to save a couple bucks on extra concrete. And they built the
That's
houses, but
it's a confined.
Although the developer sold
Spot.
off all the building sites to a builder, so he didn't really pay for any
Well,
concrete, yeah. Yeah.
even the builder looking at it.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly, yeah.
Having worked for them in the past, I know
Yeah.
how they think. They'll still charge the same amount, but put, 1,000 less yards of concrete in.
Since the cat's out of the bag on those, we can't go back and undo what's already been done on those.
Right.
Is there much opportunity for more projects like that in anywhere else in the township? Is there?
Well, there are cluster homes coming in on Crowd Road.
That falls under the PUD for quail, though.
Yeah.
So
I
they're held
figured.
to different set of regulations. I mean, from what we're hearing from people and developers, folks are looking for smaller yards to maintain, and they're looking for, maybe to downsize where they want less maintenance, and the R3 district does provide that opportunity for a developer to come in and provide a low-maintenance option, because it is one of the denser zoning districts that we have in Concord. You can do up to the 6 dwelling units for the cluster homes per acre under the R3, and you only need a minimum of 10 acres for your development to qualify. So I think there's, some areas left in the township where we could see applications put in for that type of development.
So in addition to the lengthening of the driveways, which I think is a good idea, would it be out of our regulatory power to maybe make them sacrifice building units or housing units for parking spaces? You know what I'm saying? Like have so many number of building units, and then they have to make a parking lot for off-street parking.
I mean,
So you
that's
have
another way to do
so
it,
if you had
but
4 units or 5 units, and then the next one couldn't be a house. It would have to be basically a parking lot, a small pavement parking lot that would provide off-street parking for additional cars if they, because of the safety issue. Could we do that? Could you say that, and then come up with some sort of a formula based on the number of
Yeah, I mean,
units they're
you
planning
could-
on
you
putting in,
could-
and say that, okay, with these number of units, then you also have to include in those number of units, instead of building a house here, you're gonna have, instead of putting a dwelling unit here, you're gonna have to put a parking lot to take care of off-street parking.
you could require additional, guest parking based on, so many units being built. I don't know that you would want to dictate where that parking should
Right,
be
no, but
located
I'm-
per se, but.
Right.
But I'm thinking about what would be more desirable to the community, to have like a parking lot or just, your own additional driveway parking, and then like the maintenance of that parking lot is gonna be on your condo association, or to maintain that and make sure that it's, the trash is cleaned up, and, I don't know, I kind of feel like providing just that additional parking within your own private driveway might be more of a desirable option.
I use my son and daughter-in-law, they lived over in Concord Commons, in the condos over there. They
Okay.
had a little tiny driveway, which it wasn't even really hardly enough for them to put 2 cars in.
Yeah,
And they had 2 cars, and they had a 2-car garage, which is a small 2-car garage, right? And so they could, really didn't fit 2 cars, especially, if you have any sort of an SUV or anything like that. So we were always parking in the street,
Yeah.
and it's not conducive to parking in the street. And if they had any kind of a party over there where there was a couple, 2 or 3 people that came, I mean, there was like no place to park.
Yeah.
Park around the corner, on the side of the, on the side street, but you were on the street, no matter what.
Yeah.
And it was a very narrow street. It was not a very good place to have any sort of a family event or get together, because if you owned 2 cars, your driveway was full. It wasn't, I mean, your driveway there was nothing more to offer as far as parking was concerned. So, that's what I'm thinking, and they didn't have any additional parking places. They had no other places to go park off-street parking, so it was, you park on the street, or, there's nowhere to park.
I understand where you're coming from, but I can see where if you put some parking on there, some people end up using that all the time for their own personal use. Anyway, yeah, I've seen places, I've gone through condo developments where they'll have 2 cars already in their own driveway, and then the other people, they'll be parking, and they're supposed to be for guests, and they're parking there overnight themselves. Where if we just stick with the additional 36 feet, at least within your area, you can accommodate your guests, for example, and not have the other parking that has to be taken care of, like you say, by the association, or other people just using it to their advantage, and just, it's
Yeah, but
the guests.
that would be an enforcement issue within the condo
That's true,
association.
that's true.
So you just say you can't park you can't use, residents can't park in the guest parking,
No, it's true, but
But
a
then
lot
it
of
comes down to
people do.
proving it.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
it comes
No,
down-
but I'm not saying that in lieu of the 36-foot parking, the setback. I'm talking
In addition
that in
to.
addition to.
That way it completely eliminates, putting some sort of a requirement that they have to have so much off-street parking in their, I don't know if that makes sense or not, I don't know.
And for some, when you're talking about that, I'm recalling, I thought that discussion happened back when the original discussions about the parking were had that for the not the multifamily, but the condo type communities, that they were required to provide a certain number of off-street additional spaces
Yeah.
beyond the driveways for the houses.
Yeah,
I have to go back and look at my notes. from
Okay.
back
I know
then,
we
but
had-
thought- I
we had
remember
talked
that-
about
remember
this
that
before.
discussion
Mhm.
occurring about, requiring that as
Yeah.
part of the
yeah.
parking.
Okay.
I think the extension of the driveway is a good idea,
Yeah.
going to 36. I think that's a smart move. And then, augmenting that with the off-street parking requirement too could be helpful,
Okay.
to eliminate that.
Well, I'll go back to our previous, discussions on that and notes and see what we had kind of looked at, and then we can bring that back as far as a ratio of number of units before you need an additional guest parking, and I can come back with a suggestion on that if you want.
Okay, please.
Okay. Oh, okay, one other thing here. I think there was an error when I was kind of eliminating some of the changes that we weren't going to do on the next page on 1505. It's the table 1505.01. And I just noticed this right when I was about to walk out the door today, that the number of enclosed parking spaces was eliminated from the table. I think it was a merge cell issue where it just eliminated it on page 1506. So I just turned this off. It really should be the 2. It's 2 per unit. So I'm going to just put that back in. So for the single-family dwelling, a minimum of 2 enclosed parking spaces per dwelling is required. and for the duplex, and also for the cluster and the multifamily building. That provision was the same, it just got deleted by accident when updating that. So I'll add that back in, and you'll have a clean copy of that next month. Okay. All right, so section 16, some of the other changes that we were worked on before was under the 1607 permitted uses, and just clarifying that in the PUD district, if you want to do the commercial center, you must go through the site plan review as required in section 36. And it's also a conditional use as set forth in section 13. And then under the commercial standards in 1608, we already addressed parking in 1609, so it was redundant to put that under D there. So in 1609, we're indicating that all the off-street parking must comply with section 29 unless we specifically modify it here below. And then there were just a couple housekeeping items in 1612 under the township preliminary plan. And then as far as the preliminary plan submission, letter D, just clarifying that that's an existing conditions map, which includes the following features such as the topography, contour, property lines, street right-of-ways, etc. And then under paragraph J, when submitting for the township preliminary plan, they must provide that schedule for development. And we're proposing to include in here if the project is going to be built in phases, that they have to submit the phasing plan and a proposed implementation timeline. And that also must be submitted and it's subject to approval through the zoning commission and the trustees as part of that approval process. And then under 1613, under the approval of the preliminary plan, letter G, if the application and preliminary development plan are approved, then the trustees and the developer, then by the trustees, the developer has to file the plan as indicated here with the fiscal officer rather than the clerk due to the terminology change. And then new sections H and I, which talk about if the preliminary plan is approved, then the map becomes effective within 30 days along with the plan. Because this is considered a rezoning. So as long as there is no, referendum, then it is effective after 30 days. And then at that point, if it's approved, then the developer should move forward with the subdivision review process with Lake County. And then a few other housekeeping items in 1614, which is the township final development plan. Some of the, under 1615, the zoning permit, this is just clarifying, that once the final development plan for the phase is approved, and any required subdivision plat is recorded, then at that point, the zoning inspector will issue zoning permits that are applied for that conform with the PUD district regulations. And it points you back to section 11, which is the existing section on zoning permits and how we process zoning permits and when they're required and the time frames for when they expire. And then here, this would be a new proposed section. It's kind of a housekeeping thing. We already had some things in here that discussed changes from an approved development plan. But here we're really clarifying, if it's a major change, this is what we're considering the major change. And this is where you have to go back to the township and ask for approval. If it's a minor modification, that is something that could be approved by the zoning inspector if it doesn't fall under one of those categories. And then under, on page 1619, this is the RCD section of the R2. Under the open space design criteria, there is a provision in there that states if you disturb any of that protected open space during construction, that you have to revegetate it with compatible, vegetation that was there. And this, by adding this in, we're asking that they provide a landscape plan to the township so we can see how they're going to actually, restore those areas if they are disturbed during construction. Something that I've never seen with, just in my short time being here, like with Concord Ridge being developed, and some of the areas were definitely disturbed during construction for, detention ponds or sewer extensions, and the language just isn't tight on how, what they do with that after, they disturb it and how they bring that back, whether it be planting, some native species back that were there or some additional trees. I just don't think there's good follow-up, and that's why we're proposing to include that in. There was, in your packet too, I did, while looking at this section again, this has come up a couple times, there was a couple maps that I provided. These are the light beige color is the commercial section of the PUD for Quail Hollow. So when you're on Cryle Road and like the Key Bank and the Waffle House, and there's a vacant parcel in between there, these and the Gristmill offices, these are the previously approved commercial areas for the PUD. With the Quail Hollow PUD, you're allowed up to no more than 5% to be devoted to commercial. This is area, what is area 1, I guess. There's potentially going to be another building here, probably over the next few years. We've had a couple inquiries from the owner of the property and their architect as far as moving forward. I think back when you guys did the site plan review for the Key Bank, they did have a future phase, a phase 2 of a small strip center, type development that they're proposing here. And so that got us looking at the table of uses that we currently have in section 16 for the PUD. So also in your packet, I gave you 2 documents. The one with the highlights on there, this is the existing section 16.02 on letter C, number 2. It lists all of the permitted uses for the commercial center of a PUD. And if you look at I'll just read a few of them, but it's like antique shop, art gallery, bank, barber shop, beauty shop, card and book shop, boutique. Some of these terminologies seem a little antiquated. And what I did just kind of as an exercise is I looked at, our other section 22 that has all of our other commercial and industrial districts and the uses that are allowed in there, and looked at the terms that are in there, because all of those terms have definitions like retail establishment within an enclosed building, financial institutions, personal services. We define all of those in section 5, but we don't define any of these uses that are listed in the PUD currently. And I went through and I kind of assigned what was in the PUD section. If this were to fall under our other district, what category does this really fall under? So an antique shop would fit under our commercial or retail establishment within an enclosed building. The art gallery as well is also a retail establishment. The bank falls under financial institution. Barber shop is a personal service. The beauty shop is a personal service. And when you look at the list, a lot of these are just very specific retail establishments, especially on this first sheet. On the second sheet, there are, the restaurant counter services, table service, and then a couple additional retail establishments like the shoe store, sports shop, a wine and cheese shop. These are truly just retail establishments within an enclosed building. Professional offices. The athletic facility would fall under our other term, membership sports fitness club. A daycare facility would fall under a child or adult daycare center, and then the jewelry store under a retail establishment. So this was kind of, I wanted to know if you guys wanted to maybe look at this list of uses to see if there was something that maybe we need to add in, or maybe just change the terminology to be a little bit more consistent with how we're regulating uses in the other commercial areas in Concord. Right off the bat, a few that staff felt that this should definitely be added to this list that aren't there currently are the medical and dental offices. We do have like the professional office, but when you look at our existing definition of medical and dental office, and then what we would categorize as administrative, business, and professional offices, they are two different things. So we probably should list the medical and dental offices being a permitted use in that commercial center. And then possibly the business services such as the mailing and copying centers, and then even like studios for instruction, like fitness centers or other kind of studios.
Seems to me we've come across this conversation before. When it wasn't, we talked about the town hall here.
Okay.
This area.
Yeah.
We had a conversation where we did the same thing. I remember in a public hearing, when they came to speak, there was a lot of conversation about what if this, what if that. There was a lot of, where I think in that section of the code, we also talked about, we gave examples with things like boutique and hair salon, and we were very specific in a sense of trying to, as opposed to being general like you're talking about with these categories. So if we're gonna go ahead, I think this is good for uniformity and for clarity, because I remember the public hearing, the debate, I mean, we must have gone on for half an hour. An individual came in and was saying, well, what about this? Would that be a this? And that was kind of one of those maddening conversations where it's like, but it seems to me that we should probably look at that. I don't know if it was the Town Hall Commons text or the neighborhood, I forget which one, but it was when we did both of that work. Goes back a while, like.
Who, like the public was, the residents were
We had the
questioning
public
what type
hearing
of
on it, and
uses?
somebody,
Okay.
one of the people that came to ask a lot of questions just kept sort of needling the point of what fits in this conversation. It's like, yeah, that would be, well, why wouldn't this? And we kind of ended up in this back and forth about specific things like a hair salon versus a boutique. Well, what does a boutique mean? And so I remember the conversation in the public hearing was kind of, like you're saying, vague, and, you know, how do we come out as the township saying, so I think the work here is good, but my thought process extends to taking a look at those sections to see if cleaning up that area as well would also fit with trying to make this all more uniform.
Cleaning up the area. in
Well, I think we need to,
relationship
I don't
the
recall
town
the
hall.
specifics, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking we had the same kind of language in that zoning text where we talked about boutiques and random examples of the kinds of retail establishments, but we were trying to be very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what you're saying is you're working backwards from just saying, hey, retail is classifying things into different macro categories.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if in that section of the zoning text, it would make sense to look at the same thing, because I believe there we've also done the same thing where we used, as you said, an opening, antiquated
No, I don't think-
verbiage, or am I wrong about that?
No, the town hall, neighborhood, and commons districts use all the similar
Oh, they
categories.
do?
Yeah, if you look at the other handout I gave you, like, this was just straight from the table of uses, in section 2204. And they are categorized as such.
In those
like the op-
categories? Okay.
Yeah, so they're using the same definitions and categories as all the other commercial.
Mistake.
Hmm?
I recalled that incorrectly then.
Oh, maybe at one point you guys were moving in that direction, and then it got changed.
I could have sworn I recently read something that was like that too. I'll go recheck my recollection on that. I think it's good. I like the consolidation and the organization though. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And, yeah, obviously we'd have to talk about this more. I did reach out to the two property owners that own the commercial area, because the other area is further down Cryle Road that, by the water tower, south of Capitol Parkway, where, the next phase, where the condos are being proposed, for Quail Hollow, there is a commercial portion in the front. I believe they were talking about some kind of office uses there, but I did reach out to that property owner and the other property owner that owns the vacant land up by Gristmill to see, and ask them to take a look at that list, and does this cover any uses that you think that you may be, envisioning there? Our office did get a call from a company, a a national retailer that was looking at siting here, should this building be built. And based on this list of uses, it wouldn't be permitted there. But it is a type of retail establishment. So that kind of got me thinking, like, what else might come up that folks want to do that's retail and very similar to some of the other, uses that are over there that aren't on this very specific list. And if I haven't heard back, from the property owners, but they did want to review the list and they did want to talk to me about it. So, I could get some additional, feedback from them if you want to, hear what what their thoughts may be, if you want to entertain the idea of maybe amending this list. The only, by opening up to saying retail establishment with an enclosed, building, that does get you the question, well, like you're saying, like, well, what is that then? What could that be? So there may be some uses that might fall under that category that some people may not necessarily want, I guess. But I know, like, for the Gristmill area, they don't sell the property, they own it, they lease it, so they'll have control over what tenants they pick over there. For the other part, I'm not sure what the property owner's going to, sell the property off or, lease it, but.
Well, that kind of begs the conversation about zoning and what the township can regulate and what it can. The property owner owns it, they build it, they construct it, they lease the spaces. There's only so much, like I said, retail. How do we subcategorize?
Or do we need to?
Right.
Right, we're not doing it in the other commercial districts. Any thoughts on that, or
Open for further consideration.
further consideration? Okay.
Yeah, let's think about it for a while,
Okay.
move on.
Okay. Do you have anything comes to mind between now and the next meeting?
We'll let you know.
Yeah, you know how to get a hold of me. All right, so let's try to move through these other pretty quickly. Section 22, this was the commercial industrial district section. This was on the table of uses, permitted uses. The drive-through, we were eliminating drive-through facilities from the capital district. And also, in an effort to make these tables, like table 22.04, a little bit more legible, I was playing with the idea of, like, at the very top where we list the zoning districts, you'll notice that the district name is kind of Texas sideways. I was hoping that we could do that just so we could make the font size a little bigger, because this gets super teeny tiny when you're looking at that. So that was a change that I was doing in here. It's not like considered a zoning change per se, but it is a change in how the table looks. An effort just to make the font a little bigger so it's more legible. But with doing that, I noticed under the, at the very bottom of the table where we talk about building height, I was proposing to clarify that a little bit. Rather than saying building specifications, it should read maximum building height. And then for a principal building, it would be, as listed, the 40 feet. And then for accessory building, it's the 20 feet. Or whatever, across the board. And then on section 22.09, these were changes that we've already seen under the supplemental requirements, the delivery and loading areas. Just adding in the phrase that wherever the site conditions permit that the loading docks and vehicle loading doors shall be located on building facades that don't face public road right-of-ways, to try try to encourage that to be away from roads. And then the section 29 was the off-street parking. This one we worked on a lot, giving it new headings and reorganization, and trying to incorporate into the parking requirements provisions that would allow for stormwater management features to be integrated into the parking lot islands and the landscaping, and allow for pervious pavement materials when appropriate. So we included some of those into the purpose statements. Being clear on the applicability as to when these regulations apply, how we're dealing with the existing uses, and then going into the general standards that are applicable to all the parking areas as far as maintenance, storage, landscaping, meeting the fire code, meeting all the drainage requirements, surfacing requirements, and then the lighting and striping. Then the next section is the 29.04, the off-street parking requirements, where we go into the number of spaces that are required based on the use for the site and how we measure that.
Yeah, there are a couple of quick things under 2903 before we
Yeah.
get too far. Page 29.3, section F5. Is that 25%? Is that from the soil and water's calculation for the pervious pavement? Impervious surfaces?
That
Is it
came from a
25?
model regulation that we looked at.
Might want to check with soil and water and make sure it meets their requirements for anything.
Okay.
When you're talking about stormwater,
Okay.
so that we can keep them matched up. And one other thing under surfacing, we may want to, I don't know whether we want to put this in here or not, but that, dealing with the ADA and handicapped, when you're talking about the pervious pavements,
Mm-hmm.
that, some of those can't be used within the handicap accessible routes. So just, I don't know whether we want to have that in our code or leave that to somebody else reviewing it, but so.
That they shouldn't be used
That
there?
they shouldn't
or-
be used within, yeah, there's some pervious pavements that can be used.
Okay.
Under the ADA, but there's some that can't be used.
Oh,
Like
okay.
you can't use the open stone or open pavers with the stone in the middle of them, because the, handicap, the blind will trip on it, or the wheelchairs can't roll over them properly.
Okay.
So there's certain types of pervious pavers that can't be used. The ones out front here, those can be, but there's other ones that are more open.
Okay. So what are you thinking?
I
that
don't
we need
know. I
yeah.
don't know how we would incorporate that, but maybe just say that any surfaces shall comply with ADA requirements.
Well,
Okay.
I think the thing to do is figure out if there's anything in ADA regs that would cover that would supersede that they'd have to be compliant to those regs, and ours would.
Anyway.
Is that what you were
Right.
saying
Yeah.
earlier?
Yeah,
It's like
just
somebody else's
some
regulation.
reference in there
Yeah.
that they need to, the surfaces need to comply with the ADA regulations with regards to handicap parking and
Okay.
access routes.
So the table 29.04A, which was the minimum off-street parking standards, we had some modifications here. Under the single-family dwelling and duplex dwellings, we moved those driveway and parking area requirements to another section, so that's why they're being strike through on this section, because this is purely the number of enclosed parking spaces, or that must be required, or that must be provided. And some of the changes under the library and the community center, those were modified based on what we were changing in section 13. And then we did do some modifications under 29.05, a new section that talks about the alternative parking options, allowing for a process that would allow for deferred construction of the required parking, and also allowing for shared or off-site parking. And then in 2906, the design standards for the parking lots. And this is where we go into the parking space dimension requirements. These, maintain the same. Also, the parking lot aisle widths are the same regulations that we had. Something new we added was the bioretention and the interior landscaping. That would allow for the interior landscaping to be, those areas to be used for any bioretention approved from the county engineer. We talk about in 29.07 the parking lot access drive regulations as far as location and shared drives. Which kind of brings me back to your question of shared drive. I'm gonna have to look at that in relationship to the definition. I mean, it'd be something that we do need to maintain based on how we're regulating it in 2907. And then we had, how we went back and forth on the bicycle parking. We didn't make it required, but we encouraged it in section 2908. And then the new section 2909 is the table for the waiting space requirements for the drive-through facilities. This is where we dictate the size of the waiting space and the number of them that would be required. And then in section 2910, these were the parking in the residential districts. And these are in section A, this is specifically for single-family homes and duplex dwellings. It's the same provisions, the driveway must be set back 3 feet from side lot lines. Driveways and parking areas can't exceed more than 40% of your front yard. Same regulations that we already had, just a little reorganization. And then in section B, this is where we talk about the parking of recreational vehicles. And parking of the commercial vehicles and the display of vehicles for sale. Were there any other questions or comments on that? And then section 34, the fences, we are proposing in section 34.02 that all residential dwellings that are proposing to put up a fence would need to get a zoning permit unless they're exempt for an agricultural use. Rather than as the current regulation states, if you have 2 acres or more, you have to meet the requirements, but you don't have to get a fence permit. And then in section 36, the site plan review. Some housekeeping items here. And then one of the major changes is that the zoning commission will be reviewing all the site plan review applications in addition to the design review, regardless if it's a conditional use. So the developer would seek their conditional use permit from the BZA, and then if they're approved, then they would do more of their full engineering plans and come in front of this board to get their final site plan review approval and design review. And there are some housekeeping items on what we want to see on the site plan. and some reorganization of that, just to put it in a little bit of different order, because we want to see like the layout and utility plan, and then we want like the separate landscape plan, which I know we get. I think this will just be easier for folks to follow when they're looking at our guidelines and they're actually putting their application together. It's just some, again, a little bit of reorganization, housekeeping. One thing that we are proposing to add more additional standards to was on the page 36.12, which is section 36.12. And here we go into deviations from an approved final site plan. Previously, we just stated that any deviations were prohibited. However, if you found you needed to make any deviations, you were to submit them to the zoning inspector, who then made a determination on whether or not it had to come back in front of the board or if it could be approved. That left a lot of discretion to the zoning inspector. So what we are proposing to add in some benchmarks. Okay, this would, if it falls under this, it's a major modification, and it has to go back in front of the zoning commission for an amended approval. If it's not one of those items, then it could be considered a minor modification that could be approved by the zoning inspector without coming back in front of the board. Any comments or questions on any of that? And then just a few edits in the design standards, section 37, just making it clear that when you're coming for design review, that we're also going to be reviewing, you know, all the buildings, any of the signs, your trash enclosures, your fences, and any lighting that's proposed, and making sure that they're providing all that information as part of their application. And that was 38, the last section. Got some changes here, just clarifying in 3802 that these landscape and screening regulations apply to all non-residential uses and developments, including the multifamily developments and the planned developments, and that the landscape plan must be submitted as part of those approvals. There was some rearranging of some existing regulations as it related to that the landscape plan must be prepared by a landscape architect or a landscape design professional. It was just moving it from 3802 or 3803 to 3802. And then we had made the change in 3805, the interior parking lot landscaping guidelines, that when you have a parking lot that contains more than 6,000 square feet or parking for more than 20 vehicles, then you would be required to provide that interior parking lot landscaping. And the change that we are doing here is that we were going to include, when calculating the parking lot area, we are including the interior access lanes and any loading areas as well. We're not going to exclude those portions out anymore. I think it's easier for staff to review and administer, and I think you'll be happy with the end result as far as the amount of landscaping within the parking lots. And then here we reference in that same section 3805 G, if you do the bioretention in the interior parking lot landscaping islands, that you are permitted to do that. You don't have to do the tree and the other shrubs that would have been required in those areas. Some of the other changes on the last pages was just fixing some colons and semicolons, but it marked it as a change. On page 3811, under the maximum fence height, that little table there, the header says zone. However, we refer to all our zoning districts as use districts, so that was just a change to show that this is the use district and that's not necessarily the zone. And then under the recommended vegetation list, we're adding that, the statement that native plantings are encouraged within the landscaping and that they should be incorporated as much as possible into the landscape plan. So what I can do is I'll go back and we'll look at some of the items we already discussed, do a little bit more cleanup on this, and we can put it on the agenda for next month again, if you so wish.
Yeah, I think we should just keep moving forward on this.
Okay.
Get the research done on the,
Okay.
the items that Jerry brought up and get the research on the microbrewery and distillery
Okay,
stuff, and then we can knock that out
okay,
in the next meeting, and then maybe have it reviewed, and then schedule a public hearing,
okay.
get some of that put in. Hopefully we get it done before the end of the year, maybe? Maybe?
Possibly.
Is that wishful
It'd roll
thinking?
into 18. We're gonna have, we're expecting 2 site plan review applications for next month too.
Okay, good.
So, and then design
where?
review. Well, the Crowell Crossing Retail Center, they're ready to do their last, to get their approval for their last building there. It's kind of the last building that's gonna be built on the southern end.
Is that the one they're talking about, Chipotle?
That's the one that they've indicated on the plan that it's Chipotle. So they had to change some of the site improvements because Chipotle doesn't do like they originally thought it was gonna be like a regular drive-through. But the building ended up being smaller than they had originally thought was going to be there. And they still are doing some kind of drive-through concept. They're actually gonna be in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals next week to get approvals on those conditional use permits. They're doing more of a pickup window, but it is still somewhat of a drive-through. So you'll, make your order on your phone or your app or whatever, and then you'll go through the pickup line and pick up your
okay.
food. So there's so you'll be doing the design review on the building, which
Right.
we haven't received yet, but we do have the site plan, so we are reviewing the site plan. And then the other one, you may or may not be aware, but the hardware store on Cryle Road is looking to relocate further down Cryle. The owner of the property currently owns Concord Motorsports, and so they are proposing to do an addition onto that building. It's about a 2,600 square foot addition, and then they're going to do some rearranging of the interior to allow for the hardware store to move down there and keep the motorsports, and then whatever, they use the rest of the building for storage or
So
some other kind of
the
storage.
Crowell Road, the hardware store will close?
That will close, and then they'll reopen down the road.
They'll move down to where the Concord Motorsports is.
Yeah.
They're just
yeah.
gonna build an addition onto that building?
They're going to build an addition, they're going to have to do some additional parking, landscaping, and then they're going to reconfigure the interior space. So it's an addition plus some rearranging of walls and, space between the motorsports
Right.
and the hardware store. Yes. So that will be, that should be in front of you. We've given them some preliminary comments back on their application, and they have another week or so to get the amended site plans back to us so we can send those to the other county agencies for review and then do
Have
the.
they indicated what they're gonna do with the existing facility?
Well, I guess, that building is slated to come down completely. That street, over the years has been just a private drive. Well,
Right.
last week it was dedicated. So now it's a
Oh.
new public street. It's Gold Court. There's 5 commercial lots split off that. And one party that they had interested in purchasing land was going to be where that hardware store is and further back towards the cul-de-sac where the line is going to go. So I guess according to the landowner, that building, they're going to tear it down in anticipation of the new user coming in. We've heard that it's probably going to be a hotel.
What?
Looking
Really?
at, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So we've had some preliminary discussions with,
interesting.
yeah. One hotel and possibly 2. Back towards the cul-de-sac there, so. If that happens, you'll see it.
Does this Holiday Inn always fill the capacity?
What's that?
Does this Holiday Inn always fill the capacity? They feel...
Oh, on Auburn?
Yeah.
From what I understand, he's always booked.
Is he?
Comfort
Yeah,
Inn.
Comfort
Inn,
Inn,
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Comfort Inn.
That's okay, yeah. And I didn't want to say the wrong one, because it
No,
switched
it's
from
all right.
Baymont to Comfort, so I was
My
like, which one
fault.
is it? Yeah.
Well, they're already doing major renovations over at Quail Hall too, right?
They just announced that they're
Yeah.
going to,
Yeah.
yeah, which is great, yeah. So
that's
the
another
new,
big- So that's gonna be a big improvement.
yeah,
Needed.
so the two hotels that we were having discussions with off of Cryle on Gold Court, one of them was an extended stay and one was your traditional, hotel. So if, I don't know if both will happen or not, or one or none, but that was the likely users of that, property back there, so.
Interesting.
And those would be, hotels are permitted uses, wouldn't require a special permit, they just need to meet all the existing zoning regulations and get through
Right.
site plan review approval from you guys and the design review on the building, and help facilitate that review process with, all the county agencies as well.
Do you know how many rooms, possibly?
I think, actually, both of them were around 80.
80?
Yeah, both of them about 80 rooms, 4 stories. Yeah.
Four? Can they be 4 stories with our fire equipment? I thought it can only be.
Yeah, in that district, what's the maximum height, is it?
'Cause I thought our fire department only can go up to 2 stories.
Talk to the fire department about it. They were pulled into the discussions. Now that we have that joint use of the ladder truck with Painesville, they are comfortable as long as they have, the access around the building that's required for the fire code, and they have, they can get their trucks on the surfaces that meet whatever their fire codes, they do have the equipment that could reach up to the, 50, 55, 60 feet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
How tall's the hospital?
4 floors.
Yeah, I mean, I
Same
think that's
height.
like 60, 70 feet tall.
Yeah, same height.
right?
Yeah.
Look it up. I know you start hearing things like 4 stories and you just start.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it?
Start getting glassy eyed, you start getting apoplectic over there. I mean,
You never know.
Okay, are you done, Heather?
Yeah, I'm done. If you're.
Thank you very much. That was a very good job.
Yes.
Very nicely done. We will look forward to the ongoing work and the completion so we can get that slated for public hearing. Okay, the next item on the agenda is going to be the correspondence report that was omitted from the agenda. We won't mention names, but it was. So any correspondence, Frank?
None for me.
Nothing? Morgan?
No, nothing specific.
No? Rich?
I did have a text or an email, I forget which, from a resident in Concord asking if there was any truth to the rumor that we're building a high-rise Section 8 apartment building at the intersection of I-90 and 44. And I explained that we couldn't have a high-rise, and there had never been any discussion on any such a building.
Where did he get his question from, I wonder?
Yeah, Section 8 no less.
Jerry?
No correspondence, sir.
Nothing? Nothing on my end either. The next item on the agenda is to do the approval of the minutes for the September 5th meeting. I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the minutes of the September 5th, 2017.
So a motion made
Second?
and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. All in favor, none opposed. The last item on the agenda, well, the next to last item on the agenda is the next meeting will be November 7th, 2017. So make that note on your calendar. And anything else we want to talk about? Anything else anybody would like to see on the agenda for the next meeting? We got some work to do. Sounds like we got some interesting stuff coming down the road. Nothing? Okay, with that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.